All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Underscore. My name is Shannon Howard. I'm based in Black Mountain, North Carolina, right outside the beautiful city of Asheville. And I'm excited to host this month's Underscore. I mean, I love hosting Underscore in general, but this month we're talking about the business impact of customer education, and not in the theoretical sense, but actually in the dollars and cents sense. So this month, we're going to be talking through recent research from Forrester Consulting. So Intellum commissioned a report, 300 customer education decision makers, so director level and above, about the business impact of their customer education programs, the ROI that they're making on their programs. And if you've had a chance to dig into the report, you know that the results are pretty astonishing. So this month, to join me, I've got two guests. Actually, we're going to backtrack. Housekeeping. So as we go through the call, this is interactive, right? It's a two-way conversation. We just don't want to talk at you. Feel free to pop in the chat. If you have a question, use that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to submit a question. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end, but using that questions box, make sure that we can kind of get to the questions and they're all in one place. The webinar is being recorded, so if you have a meeting at the half hour, that's okay. We'll still be recording. We'll send you the recording afterwards. And then if you need to access closed captioning, you can do that using the CC button at the bottom of your screen. All right, so with that, we're going to talk about these trends, but first I'm going to introduce our special guest. So John, give us a wave.
Hello,
This
everyone.
is Lang. John is the CEO and lead analyst at Talented Learning. So John is in the unique position, not just looking at the learning management technology industry, but specifically for those externally facing extended enterprise LMSs. So looking at customer education, partner education, extended workforce training. So John is really a specialist in this area, has been doing this for a long time. So we're excited to have him join us. And then Greg, give us a wave. I shouldn't wave.
Hey, everybody.
Here you go, you wave. So this is Greg Rose, and he's the Chief Experience Officer at Intellum. And Greg has held a variety of roles and responsibilities here, but currently heads up our advisory services department, where he's working with clients hand in hand to build out their education program and to provide more consultative approach to business outcome planning and making sure that people are using their learning management system effectively, that they've structured their programs in a way that allows them to scale. So very excited to have these two here today. They're going to be talking through the data points. I see some of you are already in the chat, so hi and welcome. I'm glad you're here. And we'll go ahead and get started with the first data point here, which I think is just a very exciting and promising one. So John, you want to kick us off?
I think what we're looking at, as I watched this or I read the report and saw this, I smiled right away because I've been following along on the same process of watching the internal teams grow in organization after organization. And I think the reason that you're seeing the spend on customer education grow is because it's measurable. And organizations start off small and they start having successes and they start measuring and they start realizing that they can impact a whole bunch of business metrics around the customer life cycle. And so I would expect this trend to continue to grow because it's not on the cost side of the equation. This is now on the profit side and the business competitive side of the equation. And as this becomes more and more known in more and more organizations, it's no longer going to be sufficient even just to invest a little bit of money in customer education. It is going to be, I believe, a core product of every organization to differentiate. What do you think, Greg?
I think you said I agree with everything you said. I think you made a really important point. We're gonna go deeper into some of these details as we progress, but there is an overarching theme today, and customer education works when the business invests in it. And I think you're absolutely right there. We've got these numbers that say things like, successful programs are reporting impacts on revenue and growth numbers. They're saying things like 35% increase in average lifetime value of a customer after they've become fully educated, 30% increase in closed-won opportunities, 25% increase in customer retention. These are big numbers. And so if education can make this kind of impact on revenue, this slide to me suggests, one way we could look at this slide is our competitors are spending more on education every year. And I think we have to ask ourselves, if we don't have a huge investment in education today, like, why is customer education not the growth strategy for the company right now? So as we talk through the research today, I think the main goal is to provide everyone that's on the webinar today with the data that you can leverage to secure the buy-in and the budget to build a program or to improve an existing program that's going to move the needle on business goals like revenue, cost reduction, retention. But let's keep going. We'll talk more about that.
Yeah. The minute that you can prove it, that's the minute that getting budget becomes easy.
It's the holy grail.
And yeah, it's the holy grail. One last comment on this, another thought that occurred to me as I was looking at this is customer education isn't one department. Customer education for different organizations can involve customer support, customer service, customer experience, the marketing departments. And I think as organizations become more mature and they start bringing in these other departments as almost a governance of customer education, that's another reason why the budgets and the teams will grow as more departments are chipping in and seeing that working together moves the business needle even further.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about investment in customer education. And so now we have a little poll for y'all before I'm gonna have to relearn how to use Zoom here. All right. Gotta
They make it
find,
tricky. A little customer education right now on the
There we
spot
go.
would be handy.
okay, polls. Okay, so before we get to the next data point, wanted to ask you all a question. All right. So when you think about your customer education program or customer training program, which of the following best describes your program? Is it a fully formalized program? You have that dedicated customer education team or function. Is it somewhat or partially formalized? So you have some people maybe working on customer education, but it's part of maybe an overarching marketing program. Or is it more here and there, ad hoc? You occasionally are investing in, maybe it's support content, maybe it's training webinars, onboarding, but there's not maybe necessarily a dedicated function or department. I'll give y'all a few more. Wow. Okay. Most of you have already participated. So I'll give you a
All
few
right, speed
seconds.
polling.
Yeah, speed polling. Quick hit answers. So we'll give you another second to finish submitting your answer. We'll share the results, and then we'll talk about, based on what we're talking about here, kind of where is the industry today. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end this poll. Can y'all see the results here?
All right. That's not what I was expecting. That's great.
65% fully formalized, so awesome. 16% somewhat or partially formalized, and then 15 in the ad hoc space. All right, so how do we compare to the Forrester data? All right. Sorry, I did not actually put the slide of that. So we wanted to understand where you all are at so that we could talk about education offerings. And
it makes a good V right towards what we were just looking at, that hockey chart. It's that you saw that same slide years ago, it was almost reversed where most weren't doing it and just a portion formal. So it's I think that's another reason why things are moving forward like that. But sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Greg, did you want to kick us off for this one?
Yeah, sure. I agree with what John said. There was a lot. We saw this this sort of recap of formalized, the percentage of formalized programs versus something in the middle versus ad hoc. And I think we all know that that's the formalized approach to an education program is increasing. There's 0% surprise there. We just looked at the fact that lots of companies are spending more money. I think this slide is interesting because it shows us that there's been a shift in what the research referred to as education offerings. And so we see some of the things that are being more prioritized over others. There's a few things in this slide that specifically stand out to me, and I mean, I'd love for the attendees to start throwing in ideas or comments into the chat as well. And John, please feel free to interrupt me. I mean, a few things I want to call out. One is that the term pre-built courseware here, I think refers to the formalized curriculum, and this number that like we just showed, like 65% of our audience today is identifying themselves as formalized curriculum. I think that pre-built courseware really refers to formalized curriculum as opposed to like off-the-shelf libraries that are utilized on the employee learning side. Another thing that stood out to me was this change, from 2019 to 2024. You see certification in 2019 at the bottom, and then we don't see it really on the list for 24. And I don't think that means that certifications are going away or being diminished. I think that certifications are incredibly important in SaaS software, and frankly, we're seeing an increase in our customer base of the utilization of certification. I think the thing to call out here is that I believe this demonstrates a decline in the use of the term certification when it's utilized less like a true high-stakes certification and more like a marketing ploy to get people to consume content, by offering what we would really think of as like a certificate or a badge that doesn't have any like real meaningful clout, or it doesn't improve your reputation. It doesn't help you qualify for a job. So I don't think it's certification that's going away here. In fact, I think certifications are utilization of certification is increasing. I think what we're seeing is less things called certification because that didn't work. Lots of, 5 years ago, there were a lot of these things called certifications that really weren't. They were just paths of content that led to a certificate or a badge. But I'll pause there. John, tell me what you see.
I agree. I agree. I think as organizations just become more mature with the term, the difference between certificate and high stakes certification becomes really important. So I think people are calling it less than that. But I think just as importantly, I think something that's changed is just the mentality of training everybody up front for every scenario and then setting them loose into a software. I think that's where we started, 5 years ago in building that type of technology out. But the reality is nobody has time for that. Nobody wants to do that up front. And after they do it, they forget it anyway. And then they're still in the same boat of needing assistance at the time of need. And so I think customer education departments are pivoting to that reality. And so in-app guides are becoming much more important. The online forums and communities, showing up now that they weren't showing up 5 years ago because people have a question. They want to go get the answer right away. Either get the prepackaged answer, get the AI answer, or get an answer from another expert so they can get through that task and get through the next thing. But I think both are relevant and both are important. You need learning at the time of need, and you need the formal education to continue to push organizations. But I do think the balance of what organizations believe is more important is shifting, and it's enabling people when they need it quickly, so they don't get upset, they don't call support, they don't drive up those costs, they don't need live help, but rather they're just happy and enabled. And that was my takeaway looking at this slide.
There's another thing that starts to present itself here, and I think we're going to see it several times in several of the slides today, but there's now sort of two types of content I think get utilized inside a customer education program. There's the formalized curriculum. There's the contents that we sequence into context that leads the learner to mastery of a concept or a topic. There's generally an assessment or a quiz that allows the learner to demonstrate proficiency. Okay, there's formalized content. Then there's lots of informal content too. This can be, to your point, it could be in-app guide type stuff. It can be documentation, things we've thought more traditionally we've thought of as knowledge base or just general guides, things like that. Both of them get utilized, and when they're utilized together in concert correctly, it can be really impactful. I like this slide because it sort of nudges me to ask the question, like, what are we trying to achieve here? What are the actual business outcomes that our education initiative is intending to drive? Then I think we can ask the question, which initiative types, which includes, as we see in the list, things like certifications, it includes onboarding, it could include ongoing skills and enablement. Like, which of those things are going to make the biggest impact against our ability to drive that goal. And then we can talk through all the nitty gritty stuff like which modalities and how are we going to engage the audience, ensure they're coming back. But I like this sort of here's what was happening in 2019 versus here's what people are prioritizing in 24, because I think it lets us start to dig into outcomes, initiative types, the actual content.
Yeah. Last little observation is 2019 looks a lot more like employee learning, where customer education came from, give it to you up front, check that compliance box. And I think another takeaway is that we're branching out, we're out of the nest here of L&D and really coming at this thing now from a marketing and just like you said, what impact are we really trying to drive perspective?
Yeah.
And that's what's changing the content mix, or could be.
What content is actually going to move the needle, not the content we have always delivered. Now it's what is actually demonstrating the impact.
Sure. I'm an instructional designer by trade, so in education, so I want to draw, I want to create big, beautiful things, but that's not what people want.
Depends on the use case.
Depends.
And there's some great conversation kind of happening in the chat too about like that use case, right? Of the mix may not look the same for everybody, right? So some of this might look very much like how your team thinks about prioritizes structures learning. Some of this might not look like it. Yours might look more like 2019 doesn't mean you're like living in the pre-COVID era, but you might see that rise of workshops or virtual workshops and those requests just based on your company or your industry. So if we think about, we're talking about trends over time, how things have changed. We had some data points around slide. Okay. Kind of where education has been focused, right? Like what are those metrics when we think about tying to business outcomes, right? We don't create education for the sake of education. We do it to move the needle. And so here we have some of those metrics that we have historically thought of as associated with customer education. We still think of them as associated with customer education. John, I'll let you speak to this slide first.
For better or for worse, customer education technology came out of L&D technology. That's where the LMSs were generally born and modified over time and evolved over time to support external audiences. But one of the things that's really challenging about employee learning is proving it's working. And so, you can take training, you can complete training, you can have leadership development programs, but it's really hard to say that moved the needle. We sold this much more, customer satisfaction is better. There's a lot of, fuzzy math in between those two pieces. So I think our industry, my take when I was reading through this is our industry started off the same place that you have to be in employee learning, where we were measuring the things that we could measure in the LMS. How many logins, how many starts, how many drop-offs, how many completions, and how was that from an organization. And that's how we measured how successful we were. Those were the tools at our hands. But technology has evolved, I think, and so has our understanding of integrating data with other business systems. And when you start integrating data with other business systems, now you can start to see from this group of employees that's trained versus this one doesn't, how are they performing in other things like renewal rates or calls to customer support. And so this could transition to the next slide. Greg, this is what they're thinking about, now, the things that are improving. And you see it's a lot more than LMS data now at this point.
Man, there's no question. I mean, the place I immediately landed looking at this data for the first time, the previous slide is all about post-sale customer engagement improvement. This slide demonstrates that there is a really important trend of education bridging the gap between pre and post-sales activity. I think this is where we're going as an industry as we think through strategy, how we build programs, what makes a program successful. We have clients that are pulling education forward in the sales process. They're teaching their prospects to use the products and services they sell as a strategy for closing more business. We have clients who have defined and are actively working the idea of an educated, qualified lead. And those education leaders, those program owners, they are sitting at the table now in the revenue acquisition conversation. And I think based on where business is going, that's the table that I want to sit at.
Always, always. It's always better to be on the revenue side, for sure. And that's what's really great about the last point about moving into that pre-sales is that moves you into what marketing cares about. And marketing budgets are ginormous in comparison to customer education budgets or L&D budgets. And not only that, they're ahead of our customer education, I think, in terms of their sophistication and skill of measuring what works and A/B testing and continuing to operate. So by moving our groups in partnership with marketing, it provides so much more power to our mission, not just in the pre-sales, but then using those same techniques and the same skills from marketing departments to apply in other areas of the customer education program. And so I think the whole thing really just makes the whole concept of using education strategically stronger by bringing marketing in.
Yeah. Man, there's a whole conversation to be had next. I don't think we'll get here today about where customer education does and maybe is going to live.
Yeah. When I saw how many data slides and I knew that Greg and I were going to be chatting, I was thinking we had a lot of slides. Let's go.
Well, okay, so with that, so we've been talking about what are these metrics that people are measuring and what business metrics are we tying education to? And now we want to actually look at, okay, now that those metrics have been tied to each other, what does that look like from a dollars and cents perspective? So Greg, I'll have you speak to this slide first, and then John, over to you.
I think, John, you said a few minutes ago that, jumping from users are completing content to the education program is making a tangible impact on some business outcome like increasing revenue or decreasing cost is tricky, that it gets fuzzy. And I think there are a lot of folks on the call or on the webinar today who have probably or are still working through this and struggling to get to the equation. But I think when we look at the process that successful programs have followed, it's all about the equation that allows you to make the correlation. So in order to do that, you work backwards from the business outcome. If we're attempting to let's say the business outcome that we're going to focus on is growth. Let's say in our business, product adoption, which is at the top of this list, is an issue. And so let's work through a scenario like why is product adoption an issue? Let's assume that the product is good, and that's the quality of the product is not the issue. So let's say we land on education. So we're not teaching our customers how to achieve the outcomes they bought from us. That is where we land. So the plan is to launch new education content aimed specifically at improving product adoption. So why would we do that? Because we believe when a customer is using our product correctly, they're more likely to renew and more open, let's say, to cross-sell, upsell. Okay, that's a solid hypothesis. Then we can test the hypothesis of the customers who consumed and completed the new content. Are they more likely to renew and or spend more? Now, if the answer is yes, then fantastic. If it's no, then we need to iterate on the content and turn it into a yes. I think the point is, like, once we know that an educated customer is more likely to spend more. So a customer who is demonstrating adoption of new features is more likely to be open to cross-sell or upsell. Then we can build that equation. We can say, okay, next year we're going to make a 20% increase on a 20% improvement in product adoption. And we believe that by making that, we'll see a X% increase in ARR. And then we can test whether the users who have been fully educated and are adopting product as a result are actually more likely to spend more. And I think now we're getting into a clear ROI equation.
Not only are they going to spend more, but now we can get the percentage of what they're going to spend more. And so now the next product comes down, the next, release that we have, and we say, okay, we did this and we reached 38% of the audience and we got this much back. So now on this time around, we want to reach 80% of our audience and we predict we're going to have this much return on investment. And you can continue to take strategies to make it, better and better. Well, what you said, Greg, is broad brush goals for an organization. And I certainly see that all the time. Let's increase product adoption, but it doesn't have to be. It can also be much more tactical than that. Like, for example, I worked with a software company that had lower customer satisfaction rates, but the reason is because they would basically sign a whole bunch of contracts and then they couldn't start a new client implementation sometimes for 2 or 3 months. So by the time they started and they got through it and got implemented, they were so grumpy, from that lack of that long time to value that it was impacting customer satisfaction and churn. So their over success in the sales cycle, was to their detriment in customer satisfaction and churn. It's so weird. So what they wanted to do, or what we did, is we put in an onboarding program where we took a lot of the activities and we made them self-service. So it wasn't like they were starting in 2 months. They were just doing activities up front to ease them into that. That allowed the company to spread those onboarding resources out and be able to remove that blockage. And that's just one example of just one little thing that's going wrong that you can use targeted customer education to solve and then automatically measure. So we were able to see time to start implementation, time to finish implementation, reacting on the customer satisfaction rate, the calls to support, all of those were impacted and measured just from one initiative, solving one small problem.
No, that makes total sense. One thing that I always think gets missed in this part of the conversation, we're talking about improvement. So we're saying we have this idea that we can increase product adoption through education. We think that if we increase product adoption, then users are more likely to be open to upsell, cross-sell. Therefore, it has a revenue impact. Okay. The thing that I think always gets missed here is that we have to make sure that we're engaging enough users to make the impact. And so there is a need for program owners up front to work through the plan with marketing or support to ensure that we're getting more of the users into the platform and in front of the right content in order to see the impact. At the end of the day, this is like a reach and frequency game. It really is a marketing-like concept. How many people are we getting the opportunity to learn and be educated? How many people are we getting in front of? And then how often are we bringing them back? And so I feel like that kind of gets lost sometimes when we're talking about ROI equations. It's like, cool, we can hypothesis, but we got to get them into the platform too.
As a recovering LMS sales guy, you're just talking about the traditional funnel. Just keep on. How many can you put at the top? Because there's going to be a rate that comes out the bottom. And so once again, that's marketing concepts that we need to learn, that it is about the numbers, whether it's in sales or marketing. The more you put in the top, the more comes out the bottom. And that has to be a focus in customer education. All right, what's next?
Yeah. So next we're talking about kind of a common example when we look at what is the business impact, how you translate percentages to dollars. Support is often a really common example, right? So often customer education, one of their first charters is to decrease support tickets or decrease the number of support tickets and the costs there. And Greg, I think you had some math, that little formula, if you will, for how to think about this.
Well, I mean, I think I just kind of walked through this idea that you can work backwards from the business outcome. So if cost, reduction is our goal, And then we look at, how we're going to measure cost reduction. And so we're going to say, well, we can impact tickets. We know what the cost of the ticket is. Then we can look at the number of tickets we can reduce. And so I think that kind of equation is clear and fairly easy to understand. I think the thing that sometimes gets missed is starting with that, the actual measurable business impact so that we can make the equation work and get to the right correlation. In case I forget, there is a conversation we can have about how to get to that data. I think there's a lot of cross-functional friction in a lot of organizations, like jumping from the information we have as educators and the information that our partners in other places have, like spend or the ticket volume that's tied to an individual user. One thing I would bring up here, we have a client that went through a very similar exercise to the one John described. The intent was to reduce tickets as a cost saving initiative. One thing they recognized in that effort, they were able to identify a small subset of users they thought of as power users, and so they assumed that these people knew the product really well. They went through the process of educating all users, and then they started looking at ticket submission. And what they realized was that power users actually submitted more tickets than any other group of users, or even as the rest of the customer base combined. So one thing that did was open up places to focus and the types of education that needed to be built. It actually was around product adoption at the end of the day. Obviously, the impact of doing the work that way led to a reduction in tickets. But a sort of byproduct of that was that when they looked at that super user group, they got a little concerned initially because the ticket submission hadn't reduced as much as they had originally planned, or it didn't reduce as much as other customer subsets. What they realized, though, was that the ticket reduction, the lack of ticket reduction, or the fact that they were still submitting tickets, while that was true, it was the type of ticket that had changed. They started referring to it as high-value tickets. The super users understood product better than they assumed they had prior to education. Now those super users were submitting tickets that either allowed the company to move those users up in the maturity model and or open them up to cross-sell, upsell, because they now understood the value of the product they were using and how to reach the outcomes they wanted. So I think, you can look at an initiative like cost savings and ticket reduction and focus in on that. But there are also unexpected improvements, I think, that happen when we do something like this.
Wow, that's a great story. That's a great story on how to think about it. I hadn't really considered that before. I think just in the, I think about it just in terms of my own personal life, that if I've got to pick up the phone, at that point, I have exhausted every option, because nothing, is more disagreeable to me than going through that process at that point of waiting and doing whatever. And so for me, I think high value tickets are great for sure, but just getting rid of the headaches for your users and everything impacts so many things positively. It impacts this slide for sure. You'll be able to do more with less. You'll be able to, have less, support calls. That translates to higher customer satisfaction. That translates to a lower churn rate by doing all that. And I think it goes all the way back to the first slide and that conversion, the second slide of 2019 to now, is if you can give people the tools, your customers the tools to help themselves at the point of need, whatever that is, whatever media that is, that's what organizations want. That's what individuals want, and that'll decrease support. And this is the easiest thing to measure. It's the easiest thing to measure is the education to support calls, and education to the length of support calls and the type of support calls. And that's the last thing. Another client that just popped in my mind is, you want to reduce support calls. So what we did in this one organization, I was like, so what are the support calls about? And they're like, because they hadn't really categorized them. I said, let's triage. Let's go back like for the last 18 months and put these into categories. And we were in the categories and we found not all support calls were equal, for sure. And some were costing us a lot more money than others. And so that was the programs that we focused on first to try to close a part of the gap, the one that was the most painful, and then start prioritizing like that. So this is a great place to just in general, every customer organization can find the ROI for the cost of the system just on this slide, in my opinion.
The answers to where we should improve customer education initiatives are found in the support tickets.
Sure.
The work of sort of organizing and categorizing support issues often lead to clarity around where we should be spending our resources as educators.
Agreed.
And definitely
right.
speaks to kind of the cross-functional nature of this work, right? We should be connecting with all these other teams. Okay. Next up, we have a poll. Just to understand, okay, so we just talked about tying dollars to cents, or percentages to cents. Here we go. This one. How many of you are doing this, right? So are you in the camp of, yes, we have a hypothesis and we can measure the percentage of support ticket decreases or call decreases. We can measure an increase in product adoption. And are you able to tie that to dollars and cents? Are you not able to do it? Or are you trying? But to Greg's point earlier, maybe trying to get access to data, or maybe we're not clear on, right? You think how often companies struggle to measure like lifetime value or customer acquisition costs. It can, if you're struggling just to get that measure, it could be hard to measure your impact on that goal.
Mhm. One of the things that I've tried to do is try to come up with some hypothesis. It's not a hypothesis, but some conservative hypothesis on what one event is costing you. So in times of support call, what does an average support call cost an organization? And once you have that data, then if you can track that you had a 20% decrease, we can start to now make that leap across the canyon there to actual dollars and cents. And that's where we want to be. The percentages are great, but a percentage could mean $38 or could mean $3.8 million. And so, getting to that next level is the fun part. And that's what everybody's striving to do. Though sometimes it takes some hypothesis on, to move that process along. And you can always, just like a scientist, refine those hypotheses over time, make them more conservative or less conservative, but at least getting a line in the sand so that you can make that leap from percentages to dollars is the trick. And as this slide shows, as the
Yeah.
results.
And it looks like, a lot of us we're trying, right? And we're trying to get, whether it's access to that data or we're trying to do the correlation. So if you're in that camp, you're in good company. But I do want to just kind of go through. So in the Forrester data, this was definitely one of the most exciting slides, data points, I think, right? Is that, okay, we're surveying 300 customer education decision makers. These are companies in a variety of sizes, couple $100 million, $1 billion plus. And most of them have seen a positive return on investment. So 86 have said, I can show like a clear positive ROI. And then 10% are saying they're breaking even. And what I really loved hearing from the Forrester team was, we don't actually think that breaking even is like neutral, right? Because if you think about having education versus not, just having it is a positive. So even if dollars wise, you're breaking even, just that having that, when you think about right, often when we think about ROI, we can also think about COI, the cost of inaction. What would that do for your business if you did not have any kind of self-service resources? You didn't have onboarding, you didn't have training that would lead to, some kind of like negative result there. And so I thought this was really positive. And then John, we also, what I thought was really cool about this report too, right, is Forrester is known for their total economic impact model. And so that model is typically applied to a company or an organization. And so they're going and they're talking to customers and they're getting hard data to show the ROI of a product or a service. But what Forrester did for this was they measured the ROI of a function or an industry in customer education. So really kind of unique opportunity here to see if we look at customer education as a whole, what is the total economic impact across all of these different companies and people surveyed. So John, I'll let you kind of respond to this slide first and share your thoughts.
Yeah, this is complicated, but all I could say is, when I looked at that last side and going to this side, I was just like, no, duh, to quote the '80s expression. I think it has to be so much higher than that, the return on that, because in 2024, the cost to get into customer education with a learning system and AI helping you build content in your teams is so moderate compared to what just one percentage means to the overall impact on an organization moving that needle. And so I think that it's, unless you're not measuring, it is almost impossible to not make your money back in spades on a customer education investment. I think it's really easy. So I'd like to see slides like this where they start to compound that, thinking about like my example of just fixing one little thing in that company, one little thing about the start of implementation. And you start adding that up and you start measuring all around the customer life cycle, and every customer education does that. Well, this slide is what it looks like when that happens, I think, to see that impact and that overall ROI. This is the most exciting sector for ROI in learning systems. I mean, there's just nothing even close to this. What do you think, Greg?
I agree. Two thoughts as I was listening to you talk. I mean, one is we have seen a number of customers eclipse these numbers, so it's absolutely doable, and that's true across company size. I think sometimes we look at data like this from a Forrester, and when we are not a large company, when we are a much smaller organization, there's this default like, well, we're not able to do that. We don't have the resources, we don't have the budget, we don't have the head count, we don't have the expertise, we don't have, unlimited everything. But I don't think that's what it takes. I think education strategy will get you to these kind of results if the two things that have to be true are in place. If you've got a great content strategy and you've got great content to drive that strategy, and then if you have a platform that scales, that engages the learner, keeps them moving through content, is accessible and enjoyable to use, then you should be shooting for these kinds of numbers.
Mm-hmm. The corollary to that is, if you choose the wrong learning system, for example, and you got to take a year or an 18-month hiatus to, reset and rebuy and redeploy and transfer everything, it really impacts this in comparison to your competition. So, that's not what I can't help it since my business is LMS selection help, but that's why it's so important, because you make a mistake here and, you're talking a huge, huge impact to your business and your competitiveness.
Couldn't agree more.
All
What
right,
else
so
we got?
coming up on kind of the last section of data here. And so when you think about, okay, all this survey data, and I think Clea said this in the chat, right? So education is about behavior change, and we want to tell people now what do we do with this? This is, I think, exciting as Forrester looked at. If we look at high success and low success organizations, what are high success orgs doing differently than low success orgs when it comes to customer education? We're going to kick this off with one final poll, and I finally am like getting faster at finding it in the more drop down. Okay. So we want to know, when you're with your customer education program, and you might offer multiple types of education, you probably do. What are the types of education that you're offering? Are you using in-app guides? Are you using training videos, like how-to videos, brochures, handbooks, other printed materials? Do you have published training documentation, pre-built courseware? Let's go back to our previous definition of like a course e-learning, more formal curriculum. So I'll give you all a second to respond to that, and then we'll share the results, and we'll talk about some of these things that organizations are doing differently.
It'd be nice to see the mix here of, as the audience was saying, no mix is right. Every mix is different. It's curious to see what people are using. But if you go back to that first poll though, and whether it was formal or
Mhm.
semi-formal and things like that, I think what's cool is we'll get to see coming up is going to make a lot of people on this call feel good about the
It's
formality of.
also making me realize that I flip-flop the polls in order.
I know.
Yeah, I issue
That's
them.
all right. We'll tie it together right here.
Yeah, that's okay. Okay. So we're gonna end here. So 39% using in-app guides. And this is really like, I feel like I'm hearing more and more people
Share the results.
about, share the results.
There we go.
More and more people talking about like, how are people using in-app guides? How are you tying that to, let's say, video or longer form course content? Vast majority of people using training how-to videos, 92%, 29% with training brochures, handbooks, printed stuff, 66% have some kind of documentation, online forum, community, blog, and 61% in that more formalized curriculum. So thank you for participating and sharing. Okay, and now imagine back to our previous poll where we talked about formalized versus not formalized. And Greg, I'll let you kick us off here because I know formal learning is one of your favorite topics.
Yeah, I mean, this slide I don't think is going to surprise anybody. I think there is a conversation about the definition of formalized, as we talked about a little while ago. I think formalized, in my opinion, is referring to a cohesive strategy. Education is happening all over our organizations, and it's happening outside of our education team. And I think there's an opportunity to pull a lot of these experiences, or at least orchestrate these experiences across that are coming from different function areas and maybe owned by different function areas. I think there's an opportunity to orchestrate all that. When I think about formalized, I think about like the fact that it has a clear, cohesive strategy. The content type, whether it's formal curriculum versus more reference material, the modalities of that, like how we're getting users to system, whether it's happening inside the LMS or it's happening outside of it, that to me is, while incredibly important, is a step down from what our education strategy is. And so what I hope we're seeing here is that there's a significant increase in this idea of a well-built, well-orchestrated strategy for education that is driving clear business outcomes.
Yeah, without a doubt. The scary word nobody likes to say is governance. And so, it's really important, I think, to have a formal, what I think formalized, fully formalized means is that you have a governance structure. And what that means is that you've identified who all the stakeholders are, who all the people that are impacted, what are all the departments that are impacted, down to all the specific use cases. And you've solicited that input and created a formalized plan of how you're going to interact, how you're going to play by the rules, how you're going to help each other. And, that starts off more shallow, and then it grows over time as you find problems that you want to solve through that. But one of the challenges in customer education and in complex employee education is, the more cooks in the kitchen, the more you have to formalize it in terms of that, in terms of the plan of working together, because there's no existing plan, chances are right now, because this is a new discipline and new innovations and new groups working together for the first time. So planning your work, working your plan is smart no matter what it is, including education.
This slide actually reminds me of the one previously when you look at year 1, year 2, year 3, like that year 1, you're maybe closer to breaking even because there is that upfront investment, right? And the teams that are most successful are those ones that are making an investment. Like I know impact.com spoke at the SEDMA conference recently and talked about their business made a strategic bet on education that's paying off. And if we look at the history of HubSpot Academy, which I know we all like to look at what they're doing and kind of leading the way in customer education in a lot of ways, that was their decision too. It's like they kind of tested with it and then they made an investment in it, strategic investment, and have like a dedicated team. Okay. John, you work with people on finding the right LMS and getting support for their customer education programs. Talk to us a little bit about what you see here with this data.
Mhm. So because of the same theme again, because of the multi-nature discipline of customer education, it's easy to, an organization's easy to find themselves without the right resources. So maybe you don't have somebody that can do the data analytics. Maybe you don't have somebody that can create the mobile app or that's good at embedding content in somebody else's application or is good at integration. It's very common that you don't have all the pieces on your particular team. So um, customer ed organizations really have two choices at that point. They can either hire or they can, well, three choices. They can go out to a third party or they can use the services provided by one of their existing vendors or their learning system vendors. So one of the trends that I've noticed over the last couple of years is a swinging of the pendulum from being a software solution to being a solution provider, where it's product plus a whole lot of services. And more LMS or learning system providers are staffing or having the ability to provide those fractional resources from CLOs to analytics to graphics to video, content development, integration. You need it. And so what makes that great for customer education organizations, if they take the time to define their requirements up front and identify what their gaps are, they can make those gaps as part of the selection process of a new partner. And so with one contract and one partner selection, they can get a platform and services that they need to round out their team. And so I don't think there's a right way to do it. When you need resources, you need resources. And so I try to get it all three ways until I find the one that, that works the best. I don't necessarily think one's better than the other in my experience.
Something I'll add. Yeah, I'll just add one thing here. I think at the end of the day, the 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 data that's in this research, it demonstrates again. I feel like I'm on a soapbox here, but it demonstrates that when the company invests in customer education, it works. Customer education, like, we've seen a lot of people do amazing things with very little resources. So we know doing things and doing them well works anyways. But in order to achieve the kind of impact we're looking at on some of these slides, it requires the business to invest in customer education. And I hear Shannon saying that multiple times today as well. The data that's in the report makes the case. It demonstrates that how big of an impact is possible when the business invests. And so when I look at a slide like this, and we're starting to recognize that it's not about cost. We're all so cost conscious. Getting to a place where you're pulling in an expert, the content is an easy one to sort of pick on. There's such a fine line between well, John, you made I'm an instructional designer comment a little while earlier. Like, there's such a fine line between this content looks amazing and this content actually leads somebody to understanding the concept or the topic. It's such a fine line. And so getting people to bringing in outside expertise to help you manage that fine line is not always cheap. It can be expensive. What I hope is that we now have data that can be used as a result of this research to go to the business and say, look, this is the investment we need, and this is the kind of results we're going to get out of it. And I think that's been hard to do in the past. So I love this slide because it makes the case for, again, for marshaling the kind of internal support to get more budget, more headcount, more resources.
All comes back to the same measuring that we're talking about. So, maybe you have to outsource it first and then, you get to bring it in as you prove your business case. But as long as you're measuring and you're measuring the impact, then you have options on, what's the most efficient way to scale out any particular gap you have on your team.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's employees, sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
All right, last slide we'll speak to here and then we'll wrap up. So top 4 things that these high success orgs said when we said how important are each of these things, these are the things that they said are most impactful when it comes to being successful with customer education. And Greg, do you want to start us off on this one?
Sure. I mean, again, I don't know that this is super surprising. Like when I look at this slide, what I think we're looking at are, we need to orchestrate. It's the orchestration of all of the experiences inside our company that are educational in nature and how we're going to orchestrate them. I think what we hear is that successful programs rely on a platform that scales, and with the success of the program, both from a learner experience and from an admin experience, frankly, like having the features and functionality you need to actually get the work done is just as important as the learner experience. And then I think the third thing that rings when I look at this slide is just the utilization of trusted advisors. So you've got you should have trusted advisors on the platform side that can talk through best practices and things they've seen with other clients, and platform utilization. You've got trusted partners on the content side. We work with a company called Fresh Cognate a lot, and Doug Piechuk is a practitioner. He's an education professional. He walks the fine line that we talked about before. So you've got to have that trusted experience on the content side, and then you need trusted experience on the consulting side. There's this guy, John Lay, that I think, really has his hands around the industry and can provide the kind of the trusted guidance from a consulting perspective that makes all of this work. And I think we're seeing the expansion and continuous development of an ecosystem that education professionals can rely on.
Yeah, thank you for that. As I was looking at the slide, I was looking at a completely different way, that as a business of helping LMSs or organizations buy LMSs, I'm listening and triaging that first call each time on why are they calling me in the first place? Because you don't call me unless, if everything is working right. And all 4 of these show up all the time on why they're calling me looking for another system where mobile doesn't work. They can't scale, they can't grow, they can't manage 10,000 customers, they can't manage in the right language, they can't do the right type of data, so they can't prove their measurement. They're terrible at integrating. We can't get the data out of Salesforce. Just things like that push them over the edge because customer education is too important. So the flip side of that, seeing that high successful organizations figure all that out doesn't surprise me at all, because that's what I see every day.
All right, well, these are just some of the insights from the report. I did drop the link in the report before. We're going to wrap up here. First thing I'm going to say is at the end of this, I'm going to pop in the chat. If you want to register for upcoming events, we host Roundtable, which is like a live group discussion. We host monthly webinars like this, where we'll be talking about subjects around customer education. As you leave, and I know as education folks, you understand the importance of surveys and providing feedback. So we'd love to hear, how is this for you? What did you like? What did you not like? What do you want to hear us talk about? So please take a moment to fill that out. I'm also going to encourage you to go follow John on LinkedIn.
Thanks.
And yeah, follow our friend John, follow Intellum. We're here. Hopefully putting out some good content for you all. And then next month, we're going to be hosting a series on AI and education. So another part of the Forrester report was asking people, what are you doing with AI and how many people are using it now? So we're going to actually be highlighting some people who are using AI as part of their education program and talking about their practical application and the things that they're actually doing today with it, not just like kind of theoretical pie in the sky, what we could do, but actually what they're doing today. So we hope you can join us for that. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and we'll wave goodbye and say, hope you have a great rest of your day. And we'll see you next month. All right.
All
Thanks,
right. Thanks,
John.
everyone.
Thanks,
That was
everybody,
fun.
for attending.
Thanks for attending.
Yeah.